Howdy. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me in this Answers for You topic, PI transfers. My name is Deanna Hawley, and I am the Post-Award Research Administration Manager for the TMU team here at SRS. Why don't we go ahead and get started and talk about these PI transfers? PI transfers, we will start with our internal process. A lot of times when faculty come and go through this university, there's always a guide that we want to abide by to remain in compliance with our research sponsors. A transfer of a PI and subsequently their awards from one institution to another is a complex action, and numerous items should be discussed prior to that award being transferred from one grantee institution to a new institution. Although it's not simply a change of a name on the documents that we all wish it was. First step is to please notify your research administrator here at SRS as soon as it's determined. Work with the department and SRS research administrator to identify all of the projects being affected by this faculty member transferring. I want to interject here as an icebreaker for this presentation to include a fun fact. SRS does not see any termination requests in Workday. Therefore, we rely solely on the departments and faculty to communicate to us directly who is being transferred when that Workday request is being entered. It's so important for SRS to be in continuous communication with the faculty members and department at these pivotal moments during a faculty member transferring. The second step, notifying the department and SRS to begin that process to ensure compliance with our federal, state, and university regulations and procedures during a PI transfer is another crucial and pivotal moment. Once we identify that a faculty member is transferring, we will start with our internal stakeholders. We will pivot to our department head, our dean, our center director, if those individuals are applicable to those projects and departments, and we will capture that approval. Once those approvals are obtained, we will continue through this PI transfer process. Maintaining collaboration with the department to review what our current expenditures are, what we have in pending to review, and the future expenditures that we will need to pursue in order to complete this PI transfer. As we go through this internal process, we're coming to our next step to review the grant terms and conditions, the scope of work, and expenditures again to make sure we did not miss anything along the way thus far. Finalizing and submitting all of the expenditures onto the research projects is a really complex step that we said before. Looking at that project effort, pulling those award budgets and those proposals to ensure that we are meeting our obligations still to maintain that project effort for the faculty, for the other personnel on the project. Making sure that we submit all of the concur reimbursements for travel that is necessary to complete prior to the PI transferring. Any supplies or other costs that we might have incurred along the way, we need to ensure that those costs get submitted through our internal portals such as AggieBuy. Subrecipient invoices, if we do have any subawardees involved in our current projects that will affect any kind of PI transferring, we will want to coordinate that with our subawardees and those vendors and make sure that these invoices get processed prior to. Another fun fact I want to interject here. In most cases, expenses must be final before a PI transfer request can be submitted to a sponsor. You know, a lot of times when sponsors require us to submit these requests, they too want to see, where did we land on our final expenditures before a PI is transferring? To our next step, compliance checks with all units necessary. This is a really beefy step. This is where some meat and potatoes come in. So when you're working with faculty, a lot of research projects that we encounter, whether it's a federal project, a state project, industry, all across the board might encounter compliance through that project that we would need to discuss with those set offices to ensure that a smooth transfer will process. And that way, when the faculty member gets to their new institution, they can start off on the right foot knowing that they're still in compliant. So a few of these questions I'd like to introduce to you guys. One question that we will hope prompt the faculty member is to ask, do you have any human subjects? If so, please contact the HRPP office. We have included their link to their website below, and embedded in that link has their list of contacts of those IRB liaisons for you to contact directly. Another question. Do you have animals involved in your projects that you need to transfer for that faculty member? Please contact the IACUC office. Their link is also attached in here, and embedded in that website link has the contacts of the IACUC office. Do you have any biohazards, materials, or recombinant DNA? That would be the biosafety office that faculty member would want to reach out to discuss what needs to happen before that transfer takes place. Do you have any intellectual property or inventions disclosed? If so, we need to work with this office to make sure that we can process these things during our PI transfer. I want to make a note here, a little disclaimer. To reach out to the Technology Commercialization Office, it is member specific. So you might have an award with AgriLife as the grantee, or TEAS, or TAMU, or TTI. In that such a case, you would want to contact your member directly to identify who the best contact is for those conversations. Do you have any unfunded agreements? If so, we have attached the Negotiation Administration Office website link, and embedded in that link will have the contacts of who you need to have those conversations with to identify if any unfunded agreements need to be discussed and maybe closed, or if new unfunded agreements need to take place during this transfer. Continuing on, I know compliance, like I said, can be very complex at this stage in the game, but it really is significant for all of our faculty to really work with these offices within the Division of Research for the research enterprise in a process such as a PI transfer process, because there's so many things happening simultaneously as we're getting all those expenditures finalized. If you have any data samples or that you plan to transfer with you, it would be important to contact the Negotiation Administration Office again to maybe dive into a material transfer agreement. That's something to think about. Another question. Do you have any equipment that you plan to transfer? You may need to utilize that equipment to complete the scope of work when you get to the new institution. And if so, a lot of conversations might take place with equipment. You know, with our federal sponsors or state sponsors, they might have embedded in our award or agreement to say who the title vests with for that piece of equipment. If the title vests with the sponsor, and we know that we have this PI transfer request, that's going to be something we put emphasis to in our request when we submit that to the sponsor. We might have conversations if the title vests with the member. It might be that we might have to have conversations about that piece of equipment if it can be transferred to the new institution with you, or if it will remain with the grantee institution. And above all, you know, I always like to ask this because, you know, our research enterprise here at Texas A&M University is so large within the Division of Research. Have you worked with any other offices that the project administrator may not be involved with that you need to reach out to? It's kind of one of those things. Above all, is there anybody else we need to notify? And at that point, it's best that you do proactively. All right. So what we have covered so far is our internal processes of all of the conversations we have with all of the different units that make up the research enterprise within Texas A&M University. And at this step in the game, it's about time to prepare the formal request to the sponsor. Once we have coordinated and collaborated with the department and faculty member to complete all expenditures, SRS will initiate a relinquishing transfer request to the sponsor. These things can come in kind of all shapes and sizes based on the sponsor terms and conditions. Another disclaimer right off the bat, this process is generally not quick. We wish it would, because there are so many things this faculty member will have to do at the new institution. But that's why it's really important to be transparent about this process and kind of let you know in advance that this process is typically not a quick turnaround, and it can take up to a few months to solidify and complete this process. That's why it's so pivotal and important for the faculty members and department to stay in close communication with SRS to notify us as soon as a faculty member knows that they're transferring. Here are a few things that the sponsor could request from SRS or the faculty member to get some more information during this PI transfer process. It could be they might request an updated budget. On a 5-year project that we have for our faculty member, it could be this transfer is taking place in, for an example, year 3. So they might want to see an updated budget of what it will take to complete the rest of the project at their new institution. Justification for our PI transfer. A lot of times we kind of start with our cookie cutter. On behalf of said member grantee institution, I would like to pose a request to transfer this award due to our faculty members' resignation or termination here at Texas A&M due to their new appointed academic appointment here at X institution. And from there, they might ask additional questions for us specific to the project tasks to see what we have left on the project. They also might come back and ask us for other support documents, or as NSF references, our current and pending. And if they do that, that's something that we will help the faculty member supply to that sponsor. They might also follow up with our formal request and ask if we go ahead and on Texas A&M University SRS letterhead, get a relinquishing letter to them that we sign. Those are items that we would help supply to the office, or we would fully facilitate. But this is not the full list. There's always things that sponsors can come back and request for us during a PI transfer. And it's very important to know that during any kind of transfer, we will work directly with those sponsors to accommodate any requests that they come and ask us for. All right, now that we've sent that formal request to the sponsor, we are still coordinating with the new institution while we await sponsor approval, crossing our fingers that we will indeed receive sponsor approval. Once we do receive sponsor approval to that relinquished transfer request, we will document the approval and begin to start closing out the award. What does that look like? Based on the sponsor, they may request that they issue Texas A&M or any other member of the grantee institution will get an amendment. And if we do receive an amendment, we will document also in our internal system called Maestro. We will obtain the new institution's sponsored office contact information to communicate the status of the transfer and let them know other integral pieces of information that is going to be useful for them to know when they receive that incoming award. Another fun fact here, note that while grants are often transferred between grantee institutions, contracts are generally not something to be transferred as easy. Sometimes the sponsors of a contract might reject our relinquishing transfer request. In those cases, contracts might be terminated here at the grantee institution to really cleanly cut that obligation there. And then they might issue a completely new contract to the new institution at that time. If the sponsors might come back and they don't want to proceed with a new relationship with that new institution, it might be that the sponsor requests it to remain at the grantee institution. And for those scenarios, we work extremely closely with the faculty member and the internal stakeholders, such as that department head, dean, center director, those approvals that we captured early on slides 2 and 3, to make sure that they're aware of what our sponsor is really looking for in those cases. Another fun fact, in some instances, some awards would require us, if we do keep that award and not able to proceed with transferring, to go ahead and make a PI change. You know, in any kind of research project, you'll need a PI to lead all of the charges, and that is exactly no different from all of our internal proposals. If you take a PI name out of one internal procedure, process, or internal portal, is what I was looking for, it can really shake up that whole process. So identifying a lead PI to take the charge if an award is going to remain at that grantee institution is something we will work very closely with that faculty member and any new appointee PI faculty member that we will take over the project from there. You know, I'd like to add in another situation. If a project is transferred to a new institution, it might be that Texas A&M still has resources to add to that project and remain involved in that project, or AgriLife or TTI. And it might be that when our faculty member gets to that new institution, they might enter into a subaward agreement with Texas A&M University. So that way we are still involved in the project. And those processes won't be as detailed today, but they do require additional steps if a PI or faculty member is going to a new institution and they do end up deciding to subaward back to Texas A&M University. That's a subaward agreement that we would enter into. And again, those are steps that your project administrator, research administrator will walk you through those steps as well. All right, here we are to some of our sponsors that we work with very frequently when processing PI transfers. One of our most common sponsors to accommodate some of these PI transfer requests and kind of set the playing field for some of the other federal agencies is NSF and NIH. Their processes and procedures here for what they expect for being the sponsor of what is required for documentation and justification for us to be able to request a PI transfer is documented here in these links. We have NASA and we have USDA NEMFA. There are so many other sponsors that we work with that are, state. They might be CPRIT, American Heart, they might be industry, or they might be private nonprofit, excuse me. And for any sponsor where we do have to encounter a PI transfer request, it is up to that sponsor to deem approval or rejection of that request. And once they do, or if it's something that they just need more information on, again, we will facilitate whatever is needed to put our best foot forward for the smoothest transfer possible. Okay, we are through the external process. We will assume that we have sponsor approval to dive into this PI transfer and complete this process. Once your sponsor says yes, and you go through these and back to the internal steps to close out that award in our internal system called Maestro, there are a certain amount of steps that we will conduct here at SRS as a triple check to make sure we checked all of our boxes here. One of those steps might involve making sure we have met all of our technical, financial obligations to submit all deliverables to the sponsor. You know, right here, when we submit deliverables regarding a PI transfer request, they might truncate our due dates. So, for an example, if a sponsor initially awarded us a 5-year project, but in year 3, we are transferring this faculty member to a new institution, they might reissue our deadlines to make our financial and technical reports due 30 days after approval of a transfer, 60 days, 90 days, or 120 days after that approval of that PI transfer request. So it's also very, very important to remain in close communication with the sponsor during these types of transfers, because if there is a change to our deliverables, Texas A&M University, any grantee institution is still liable to remain in compliance with those deliverable due dates. Conducting all final accounting and reconciliation practices. We all know in the world of research, when an expenditure is submitted, there might be a chance that we have to process a cost transfer a time or two. And if we do have to process any cost transfers, it is 100% very significant that we get everything processed before we have to submit our final financials and do our final reconciliations before everything is due. And at this point, once the SRS administrator and we have gone through all of the closeout procedures, we will mark this project terminated in Maestro. You know, at this point, we always like to kind of pat ourselves on the back, give the department the woohoo, whoop. We finished everything, but there is always a chance for audit. So it's very important, again, through this whole complex transfer process that we remain in compliance, because we can always dive into any kind of audit from a sponsor, internal audit, or anything else of that kind of nature that might come back a few years later. So it's very, very cumbersome to make sure we retain our retention policies and make sure we have all of our documentation saved in a very safe place in Maestro. Okay, we're almost through that process. Although it seems a little more simple in these slides, there's all kinds of scenarios that can come up during these types of transfer requests. So again, I would like to remind everybody, please communicate with your research administrator when a PI is transferring as proactive as you're able to. It is never too early to loop in your research administrator. Even if it's a CC on some email correspondence or a quick phone call to your research administrator to say, hey, I heard X faculty member is transferring. That does the trick. And remain in continuous communication with your research administrator regarding any sponsored projects. You know, it's so frequent that some of our faculty members have a handful of projects. It may not just be 1 or 2, but it could be 12 to 15 projects we might need to be reviewing. So as much proactive notification as you're able to give to us, that is always appreciated for this lengthy process.